Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share and discuss resources, tools, and information to equip leaders to build creative, cohesive teams through culture and leader development. Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Natasha, and today I am sharing a conversation that I had with Executive Coach Holly Wright on coaching frameworks, value-based coaching, social style, and feed-forward versus feedback. Sometimes one of the best things that we can do as leaders and coaches is to view something from a different perspective and flesh out how something could work. Thank you so much for being with me today. So could you start by introducing yourself and telling us your style of coaching?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. My name is Holly Wright. I'm an executive and leadership coach. I am currently working as a consultant, working with global leaders in many capacities, in many industries. And my style of coaching is, it's funny. I didn't really think I had a style, but the more I read about certain styles of coaching, I'm realizing that I do have a style. And it seems to be a mix of like appreciative inquiry, positive psychology coaching, and solutions-focused coaching. So really thinking about what's possible, leveraging people's strengths, understanding like what brings life to a system or a person when they're at their best, when they're most effective, and applying that to their life, their work, and their organization.
That's amazing. I love that description too. I haven't heard that and it put quite so eloquently before. So that's amazing. So are there any specific frameworks that you use in your coaching or models? Or do you model it after kind of a bunch of different places, or how do you kind of pull your frameworks together?
That's a great question, and kind of like my style of coaching, a lot of it's unconscious in a way. I kind of look at it the way I approach cooking or baking. I have like a foundation recipe or something, and then I kind of add my own things to it as I feel like I'm either in the mood for, or the recipe, is missing something. But my foundation really is from the Columbia Coaching Certification Program, and those three components: what's up, what matters, what's next. And that's really grounded me in coaching and has helped me bring my clients through a really solid process, and always trusting that process. So with the what's up, you get the context, and out of that you get the focus. What matters, you really understand the content, and you align and understand what really matters most to that person. And then what's next, that action. And I always say you're not coaching unless you get that action point, so your conduct and it's aligned to performance. And then, the kind of also from working at Columbia, Professor Willie Peterson introduced me to the strategic learning cycle. And I kind of use it aligns with the Columbia coaching model is learn, focus, align, and execute. Just kind of always coming back, and it's a circular process, and I think a really important component of coaching and that coaching engagement and the coaching process is the review part. And I recently became familiar with a coaching model called OSCAR, outcome, scaling, know-how, action, and review. And the review part is what really I think is the key to coaching. So after, you're going through the process, the client goes out, tries something new, they come back, and it's like, okay, so what did you learn? What worked, what didn't? What was supposed to happen, like full on military style after action review, what was supposed to, what do we plan on having? What actually happened? Why was there a difference? What did we learn? And then how to apply that moving forward. So it's kind of like a combination, and a lot of it's client dependent. What did the client come to the coaching for? What type of coaching do they need, or do they want, or are they expecting? And kind of just adapting to that as you go along. So it's a mishmash, really.
Because it is so client dependent, right? Like, what does that person need? But I really love those elements of that focus, because sometimes when we sit down with someone else, especially if we're new to coaching, it becomes like this weird therapy / let's talk about these great ideas / all these other things. And so to get them to focus on like what matters, but also why it matters now. Yeah. And then those like action steps, right? Like, what are we actually going to do about it? And what can you do about it within the next 48 or 72 hours. But the reflection piece, I think, is also my favorite. I love reflection. If it was up to me, that would be my job. I would just be a reflector. But we often, especially leaders, going so fast all the time that they don't have those opportunities to, or take the opportunity to really reflect on like what didn't work and why, but what did work and why, and how can I make more of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I work on with a lot of my clients constantly, because a lot of it, they're going through leadership development programs. So our coaching engagement tends to be kind of short and transactional sometimes. And when we're working on the next steps post coaching, they're like, well, what do I do now? This time has been so useful. It's like, well, then, how can you sustain this and continue on that reflection? Because they're actually stopping and thinking and reflecting and figuring out what's working and what doesn't. And when they go back to their real life, that kind of all falls to the wayside because they're back to fighting fire. So it's how can you really structure in that time for reflection when things really start to click for you? And it's funny because I've had so many clients who are like, I'll never do a journal. I don't do that kind of thing. And like by the end, or like sometimes like a month after, they'll contact me and they're like, well, I started a journal and I'm reflecting now, because it's useful, really committing to yourself and honoring yourself and giving yourself that time and space to think.
Yes, and getting it out of you, out from inside of you, whether it's with a coach, with a person, with on paper in a journal.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be a really helpful piece too, where it's like, now it's just out there and you can examine it from a different angle where it's not just internal. Now it's out in the world, and is it going to go somewhere or not, which it doesn't have to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think once you kind of speak something, it sounds completely different than it does in your head. And they say, well, I'm just thinking out loud. And that's, I think a lot of us go into a presentation or a meeting or something, just kind of thinking things through in our head. And when then we're in that moment, it doesn't come out the way we plan it to, because we haven't put it out there. We haven't put pen to paper or talked it out loud with someone. And I think that just makes a huge difference, because there's a lot going on in our head. And, I think a lot of those thoughts can get crisscrossed a lot of the time.
Yes, I can relate to that exact example there, where I went through something and I was like, this feels brilliant. And in actual like facilitation or execution, you're like, it was okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I didn't take that time to get it out there, to reflect on it in some different ways. So it was just in the echo chamber that is my own brain, thinking that it's good or great or whatever.
Yeah, and that's funny. That's a term I've been using a lot lately, unfortunately, is echo chamber. I think we're all kind of finding ourselves in a lot of echo chambers lately. So it's, how can you really expose yourself to different perspectives and just really kind of get your thoughts out there and be open to receiving other thoughts too about it. And you're not going to get that if you keep it all inside your head.
Right. And I think in a lot of ways, we're just in kind of a divisive time now. But I think also that makes people more scared then to say those things that are inside of them and kind of like let them be out there, because they don't want it to be offensive or taken wrong by someone else. When I think really, if we can we say it, obviously we're not trying to be jerks. And if you're a jerk, we apologize and, fix it. But I think that when we can even kind of get it out there and start that's that like courageous part of leadership, where you're just kind of starting that conversation and being open to being influenced, right? Not being like, this is who I am and this is it forever. And that's just what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can't just stay the same forever. You have to be open to influence and change, otherwise you're just gonna be stuck in the same spot, and I think strength is also shown by being able to change your opinion and perspective on things.
Yes. And thank goodness I do not hold the same thoughts and perspectives as I did when I was 20, right? Like, not that they were bad, it's just they wouldn't serve anyone now. So one of the first places that we met was through the Columbia cohort for coaching. And one of the things I really loved was on occasionally on Fridays, they will have these classes where different coaches lead a session. And you led such an excellent one on value-based coaching. So I would love it if you could tell us more about value-based coaching and what that is and what that looks like and why it's important.
Yes. How much time do you have? Values-based coaching is something that I've become very passionate about over the last decade or so when I first got introduced to what actually core values are. But I think it's good to have like a working definition of what values are before I go into any further, because people can confuse it with beliefs or thoughts or feelings or something. But values are basically standards or principles of behavior, someone's judgment of what's really important to them and what's important in life. And with values-based coaching, what I feel it does is that it helps clients understand what motivates them, helps them understand why they're making certain decisions, uncovering like resistance to change, potentially identifying sources of conflicts and triggers that they're experiencing, and then learning how to take actions that are congruent with what's important to them and what their core values are. The theory of values was kind of proposed by or pioneered by social psychologist Schwartz, and so for example, some examples of values are loyalty, integrity, achievement, family, making an impact, challenge, creativity, just to kind of name a few. But there's no limit to really what those are, and values aren't right or wrong either. They're very neutral. How people go about fulfilling their values can be judged as good or bad, but values themselves inherently aren't necessarily good or bad. With the coaching, the process that I normally take my clients through is doing a values clarification and really getting down to about 8 or 10 core values, and knowing what experiences in their life kind of inform those values. And most of the time they're formed in our formative years. Our values can change completely or in priority based on internal, external life events that are happening around us. Once we're clear on those and that whole process, then we kind of form a values hierarchy and how one value or one set of values can lead into the other. And what does that ultimately bring you? Does, that bring you harmony or inner peace or freedom or whole host of things? And then once they're clear on that and they understand what their top value is and all their other informing values are, we look at certain circumstances that they're having or big decisions that are coming up, and how can they make decisions from those core values to make sure that they're honored.
I think the biggest thing that stands out is when I just kind of internally reflect and think of the times when something wasn't working, it was a values mismatch, right? Like either the organization or the person I didn't perceive values the same way, or didn't have kind of any of the same values in common, but also that there were things that probably I felt were just completely not in alignment with what I thought my values were, right? Like if something was important to me, they may not have viewed it as being as important.
Yeah. Again, it's not that some values are good and some are bad. It's just, having values that are aligned, they are the most important to you. It's going to create harmony or misalignment. Like for instance, I had a client that I was working with recently. They came to the coaching conversation they were in a meeting with their team. The team was really dragging behind on a project and the conversation was all over the place. And they said they're typically very patient and supportive, but the team was just exhibiting this really strange behavior, and they just sort of snapped and lost it on the team. And this person came to the coaching conversation saying, I don't understand what happened. This is a situation. I said, well, we already had done a values clarification. And I said, well, what are some of your values? Well, what matters most to you in this situation? One of their values was efficiency. And he's like, that was the most inefficient meeting and project and everything. And he's like, and it would just kind of like hit this boiling point. He's like, okay, I understand now. That was really like an insightful moment for them because they came to me, they're like, I don't understand, why did I do that? Why did I snap at them? And then looking back and understanding what mattered most, that core value of efficiency, they were able to make sense of that situation. And now knowing that, can move forward a little bit more consciously and intentionally when they encounter a similar situation.
And I know that as coaches, we never tell people how to act or what to do. And let's say that someone did need advice on, okay, I realize in the moment that this thing is a mismatch. Now I've caught it, which is great. That's great self-awareness, great step one.
Yeah.
But what would you, if you were to make a recommendation, what would you recommend that people can do kind of in that moment to both value what they value, but then also express that to the people around them?
The first part is just like stopping and taking a breath. In that last situation, that person was triggered, and going through that hijack moment, you gotta give yourself the space so you can intentionally respond instead of just react and snap at people. And then I think the next step is asking yourself, what could you be missing, or kind of putting yourself in the other shoes, like, okay, so what's important to them at this moment? So, for the team, it could have been getting things right, or like understanding like what the most important piece of data that they were missing was, or whatever the situation was. So they really wanted to kind of get to the root of the problem, and this person really wanted to move forward. So stepping back and getting that balcony view of what's going on and what matters to other people, and then expressing your side. So maybe asking questions first of some of the other people, like what's important to you right now? What are you focusing on? And then saying, now this is what I'm focused on. This is what's important to me that we all get done as well. So just kind of putting everything out on the table, acknowledging each other, saying, I acknowledge that this is important to you and this is what's important to me. So knowing this, how can we move forward together?
I love that, because I think that also creates such a precedence for future conversations and builds that psychological safety of, I can ask questions, A, but then B, I can actually figure out like what's wrong. Because it's never just that something's late or that something, it's never these quantifiable things really. It's normally some person feels violated in some way, emotionally in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I saw that one of the things that you do is called social style. And I don't know what that is, but I am excited to learn about what it is.
Yeah, recently became a certified social style and versatility instructor, January of this year. And I've been working with and coaching people on social styles for quite some time through executive education and leadership development programs. But to go back to answering your question, social styles are basically like a pattern of behavior that people exhibit and use in their interactions with others. So it's like observable behaviors, and using that information to then interact more effectively with other people. So there's 4 primary social style behaviors: driving, expressive, amiable, and analytical. Any kind of academic or anyone that's, it's always in quadrants, like MBTI, HBDI, DISC, it's always in quadrants. So each style, it has predictable ways of behaving in their interactions with others, their use of time, and their preferred ways of making decision. Like, what information do they need in order to make a decision? So knowing these different styles, what their behavioral preferences are, helps you to improve your own interpersonal effectiveness.
When I hear that, I think of every team I've ever been on, and how I wish that we had done something like that, like for everyone on the team, to also like create this group understanding of this is what triggers the different people within the group.
Yeah.
Do you do it for individuals, or do you do it for teams, or both? And how does that work?
Both. I think it's most effective when you do it with a team, because, like you said, is just kind of having that general knowledge, of each other, understanding what everyone else's preferences are, helps everyone kind of work better together. I have done it on an individual basis too, but every time I've kind of worked with a leader informally on it, like without doing an assessment, just kind of like an oral assessment of where they think they are and what others. But there is that formal, like, online assessment where you get the full report and everything. They always want to take it back to their team and say, well, you're this and you're that and the other, or like have them discover, what their styles are so they can work better as a team together.
And I've seen that. So like with DISC, for example, I'm big on DISC. With that, a lot of times the things that are kind of opposite each other in a quadrant, those two people are going to trigger each other somehow. So if you're like a high D and a high S, that high S being, I mean, it's for steadfast, but like they're more sensitive. And the high D cannot handle a sensitive person.
Yes.
So is the social style, does it kind of work in that way too, where you can really see where these two relationships just need more love, just need more attention in certain areas?
Yes. I think with like most of the quadrant assessments, the diagonals tend to create more conflict, but that's not to say that there isn't conflict within the other relationships as well. Like, for instance, if you have two drivers in a group who have two different agendas, there's going to be a lot of conflict there, so I think generally speaking, you're going to see more conflict in those diagonals, but there's still nuances within, all the other relationships that could potentially create some havoc if you're not aware of what those other preferences are and your own preferences and triggers and what you need to do to control yourself and help others.
I think that's a common misconception that people have, is they're like, if two people are the same type of thing, then those people are going to get along. When in reality, it depends on the personality type. But also second, especially I would imagine with somebody who's like a driver, or in DISC, somebody who's high D, no, like it needs different care than other types of relationships do. But you have to acknowledge that two A-type personalities don't magically get along.
They could, later, like I said, there's always those nuances, but I think driver is going to be the most pronounced example in that.
In one of your blogs on your website, which I loved all your blogs, I was completely cyber stalking you the other day. You talk about moving towards a feed forward, or moving towards feed forward and away from feedback. So I love that concept. So what do you mean by feed forward, and what does that look like to move towards that and away from feedback?
This concept and this thought in this blog kind of came out with recently working with some leaders who were looking to develop their team more. How can they have better conversations with their team? How can they motivate them more? And when we got to the conversation around feedback, it always seemed to go as like, well, this is what went wrong and you should have done it this way. And, let's not make sure that doesn't happen again. And that's like generally how feedback goes in any organization, because that's what we've always received and we haven't really experienced anything else. So moving from that autocratic kind of style of leadership to more of like a leader as coach style, coming from my coaching background, that's kind of the lens that I would bring to it. It's like focusing on solutions, an outcome-based approach where you kind of say, this is something that I've noticed. So you're kind of removing judgment, saying, I'm observing this, this is what I've noticed happening. Why is it important that it happens the correct way, and aligning that to organizational goals and objectives? Like why do we need to get it right? What's the impact that it could have if we get it right or wrong? And then kind of filling in any gaps too that person might be missing, and then having them close that gap. So what are some ways that you can do, or try so that this doesn't happen again, and we make sure that we get it right? So kind of you guys are sitting on the same side of the line saying, this is our goal over there. How do we get there? What are some ideas that you have? So it's really like, feed forward. You're looking forward. You're looking for that solution instead of just saying, well, make sure that doesn't happen again. It's like, all right, let's find a solution for this. Let's move forward. And then again, coming back to it, that after action review, like you're identifying a situation where you might have a similar experience, and then connecting after that. So what happened? What worked? What adjustments do you need to make?
And I think it also sounds like it's ongoing. It's not this like one time we gave feedback about that and we never address it again.
Just sweep that under the rug.
I think Marcus Buckingham, he was doing this talk and he described feedback in the funniest way. He said, he's like, feedback is this. He's like, but feedback is not this grenade that we launch over a wall at somebody and we're like, oh, I gave them feedback. Now you deal with the fallout of that. And I think that piece is so important because when people get feedback, especially from someone who is higher in a hierarchy than them in whatever way, they do need that coaching, that additional follow-up to make sure that that feedback can then be implemented and it can turn into feed forward. So it's not just like, okay, it was bad.
Yeah. And I mean, that such a great analogy with the grenade, because what happens when that grenade lands, and how's it going to make the person on the other side of that wall feel? You're not going to be in such a great place after that. So, the thought is with that feed forward approach and having the other person come up with their own ways forward, that they're going to have more of that intrinsic motivation to get it done. They came up with the ideas, they found the solution. They're going to be more inclined to implement that than just being told what to do. Generally speaking, of course, there's always those exceptions, but for the most part, when someone comes up with those ideas and feels supported in that, they're going to be more motivated to get it right the next time. Especially knowing that they're going to be connecting on it again afterward. They're like, okay, well, there's that connection point after that. I need to make sure that I hit certain targets to have a good conversation the next time.
And several times throughout, you've mentioned the concept of leader as coach. So can you tell us a little bit more, like, what does that look like in actual execution?
So, again, it's kind of around empowering your team, asking more questions than just being that autocratic, assertive coach manager where you're just kind of telling people what to do and setting the direction. And not to say that it isn't helpful, it's all contextual. Certain times and certain organizations and certain times of the year, you're going to need just to kind of hand down decisions to people and say, this is what we're doing, this is the direction we're going. Especially in times of crisis or constant change, that's what's going to happen. But there's a certain time where I think it's important to really help people grow, and leader as coach helps the engagement. It lets people know that they're supported, that you're invested in their development, and that you care about the direction in which they go. I think that a basic skill of leadership really should be coaching. And if it can't be fully coaching, asking good questions. Mm-hmm. Because we tend to remove a lot of empathy and a lot of common sense from the workplace when we're just telling people things that they know what to do, right? People know what to do. Maybe they need to be reminded, and that's fine. Everybody needs to be reminded. Yes. But usually just kind of asking questions about kind of like what's next. Or Liz Wiseman gives such an excellent example. She was doing this talk on asking good questions, and she's talking about like her kids and when they're getting ready for bed and all the things she would tell them to do. But then she kind of flipped it and she just asked them these questions that were leading, right? So like, oh, what do we do next? What should we do here? And not only was it then did she realize that her kids knew what to do, which obviously kids in the workplace are different, but people know what to do. They know what's next. But also when you ask questions, there's this opportunity for like a better solution. Because I know when I've been in classrooms and stuff and I ask people how they worked something out, they come up with something and I'm like, you should be the instructor. But just that like ability to ask questions is such an undervalued skill, I think. I think we're just now realizing how important it is. Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, that is the reason I became a coach. I started facilitating small groups in executive education programs, and I realized I was missing a skill. I was still getting good feedback and everything, but as I was moving through it, I knew I could be doing something better. And I said, I need to learn how to ask better questions. And I didn't know what that looked like. And that's how I got into the Columbia Coaching Certification Program, because I knew I was lacking that skill, and I wanted to really strengthen that skill so I could lead and facilitate better discussions and get more engagement from those people, from the people in the group. And, more and more, like I've had leaders come into the coaching conversations and saying the same things, like, I need to know how to ask questions. I think it's just kind of like a organizational history that, it's just been a very autocratic leadership style, and that's what got things done. But everything has changed so much around us that people are realizing that that's not doing the work anymore, and that they need a different approach, and understanding where other people are and trying to extract the knowledge that they have. Asking questions is the first place to start with that.
So in Seth Godin's book, Linchpin, he talks about if you were to stack 400 quarters, and each quarter, like the money, and each quarter represents 250 years of humanity, of people being, in existence. He said only one of those quarters actually represents us demanding things of each other and doing this kind of like route memorization and just follow the rules, and probably even less time than that. But that's all that it is in history. So before that, people did things in a different way. We just may or may not know what that is because of records or whatever. But I thought that was like such a great point that, when we went into the industrial age, schools changed and how we worked changed, in this kind of assembly line mentality of, if I don't tell you every single step, you're not going to know, and not thinking that like people are smart and they're going to figure it out. Instead, it's like, I'm the smartest person here, which leaders are smart, but they're rarely the smartest person. And so it's been so ingrained in us to just be a part of that like industrial age mentality, that the thought of asking questions that aren't leading questions, that aren't part of our own agenda, is so foreign that we're like you said, people are like, I don't know how to ask questions. And it's true, we don't.
Yeah. And so one of the simplest ways to do it is always checking for alignment first. The first part about asking questions is really listening, and understanding what that other person's saying and paraphrasing that. So you're checking for that alignment. And then once you have that understanding, you're aligned or misaligned, then asking a question. Typically the what or the how open-ended questions are the best way to go. And then just kind of using that basic framework to begin your quest to asking better questions. It's such a useful skill. And it's funny, I recently posted a LinkedIn post where I think I challenged people to ask 3 questions before providing their opinion or a solution on a matter. And I had another coaching session today where that kind of repeated. My client kind of came up with that solution when I was asking for options of how they could have handled the situation differently. And they said, well, I could have asked more questions. So it's funny, it kind of keeps coming back to that. Like sometimes when I see themes, I'm like, is it just me? Am I like searching for a certain theme? Am I imposing a certain theme on people? Or am I really just kind of observing and extracting the information? So I don't know, that's always a question I'm kind of struggling with myself.
Right, because we're looking for it. So we're like, are we finding it because we're like, is this that like confirmation bias?
It's like looking for a red car, on the road or something. All of a sudden, that's all you see is red cars everywhere.
I also really appreciate that you mentioned that listening part, because I think that there is that's another skill that I think more people need to really engage with, right? Not just listening to respond, which most people do, but also that listening to be influenced, listening to actually get to a deeper meaning of understanding of what someone else is looking for, and knowing how to listen and be quiet, and then also how to ask those questions that are genuinely, I'm trying to help you figure this out and help me figure out how to guide you better, if that makes sense. Oscar Trimboli, he wrote the book Deep Listening, and in that he talked about these 5 levels of listening. And what's so interesting is I think that when I consider a situation where I think I should have asked better questions or I could have been listening better, when I look at that framework, I can kind of identify, I stopped right before I got to meaning, or I stopped here. And then to be able to kind of search within myself to be like, how do I adjust that for the future? But I think that listening piece is also extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when I was going through my coach training, I had to read coactive coaching, and they go into levels of listening there. And, they go into like the global listening and listening for what's not being said. And, kind of really opens your mind up a bit. But I want to write that down, because I remember I was listening to one of your podcasts and you said you read like 1,000 books a year or something absurd. So you're a great resource, but I want to write that one down. That's one I want to read.
So what inspires you about coaching?
I think ultimately it's the ripple effects, because with coaching, I feel like it helps people become their best selves. And everyone that I've worked with, they want to have a more positive impact on the people that they're interacting with. I've noticed, of course they want their life to be better. They want to become their best selves, but a lot of time they're doing it because they want to have a positive impact on their team. And I think that's what inspires me, is that helping people be their best selves, which then in turn helps them help others become their best selves, and so on and so forth. I think ultimately, like if we all kind of took that approach and listened more and asked more questions and, ask people, what's present when you are at your best, and how can you focus on that, really can make our world a better place. I mean, not to be all kumbaya and everything about it, but I think that's my inspiration, is knowing and witnessing and hearing back from clients that is the effect that it's having. They bring their learnings to their team and it's having an impact, and then their team members bring it, to their team. And it's just, it is really inspiring to think about the overall impact that it can have.
When you coach, you're passing this on to someone else, you're helping them, but they're in turn going to help so many other people. So I think like the power of coaching is so huge.
Yeah, I agree. And, and I've noticed the work with social styles and versatility really kind of ties into that, because through all of my research and reading and experience and everything, I've found that it all boils down to one thing, and that's just awareness. Being aware of ourselves, being aware of other people, and being aware of the environment or the context that we're currently in. And that is, I think, the first step in all of it, is just understanding and observing that, being aware of our preferences, our thoughts, our behaviors, and all of that. And then from that, moving into action.
Where can people find you so they can learn more about you and your upcoming projects and your work and social styles and all the good stuff?
Well, there's my website, wrightpathcoaching.com, and Wright as in my last name, W-R-I-G-H-T, Wright Path Coaching. I do tend to hang out most of the time on LinkedIn though. So if you just go to LinkedIn and type Holly Wright and Wright Path Coaching, you'll probably find my name come up pretty easily. And those probably are the best ways. I try and spread myself out on social media, but again, I find myself most of the time on LinkedIn, because it's always an inspiring place to be, and connecting with other people for thoughts and insights and everything.
In this episode, Holly and I touched on a lot of topics, including the importance of values, feedback and feed forward, and different perspectives on coaching. To explore these concepts more for your own self-development, I would invite you to journal about a few questions and a quote. The first question is, what values are important to you, and are some values stronger in your professional life versus your personal life, and why? And the second question is, how could you use the concept of feed forward with your teammates? The quote that I have for you is from Rumi, who said, "Life is a balance of holding on and letting go." Thank you for listening to this episode of Equipping Leaders. All of the resources mentioned in this episode can be found on my website, natashacheyenne.com, as well as timestamps to help you get right to the resource that you are looking for. On the website, you can also find a weekly leadership journal entry, a resource page with challenges and downloadable content, a place to sign up for my weekly newsletter, and an upcoming leadership platform full of workshops. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha, and on Twitter and Facebook at Natasha Cheyenne. If you'd like to hear more about a specific topic, please reach out and let me know. Join me next week for another episode.